Oh, don't start clapping yet because I haven't said anything. You don't know if you're going to agree with me yet. So, hello everyone. It's lovely to be here and to finish off this session. As Stephen said, I'm Helen Macdonald. I'm from BMJ. And lots of you gave me tips about this session in various ways, and I hope that I've responded to all the ideas that everyone had about how I should do this. And it begins with the fact that I should have 3 emojis, which I've managed to include, and I should say what I was going to say at the start. So there are the emojis, but your job is going to be to work out what they mean, because I'm not going to tell you that until the end. I'll tell you my declarations of interest, and I think, like most people at this conference, my major lack of interest is I don't have any financial interests with respect to overdiagnosis. I'm paid by the BMJ, and other factors about me of interest which somehow shape my view of the world are that I'm a clinical editor at BMJ, which means I qualified as a doctor and I used to be a GP. I work as content integrity editor across BMJ's 70-odd specialist journals, and that really involves assuring the quality of content across the whole portfolio. And BMJ is a partner of the Preventing Overdiagnosis conference and has had a long-standing interest in this topic and the broader topic of medicalisation and too much medicine. And my personal bias is that I really love people. I like saying things and having a good conversation in ways that people can understand. And I'm very optimistic. So you're going to find lots of hopefully cheerful messages in what I have to say. And most of my expertise is not as detailed and methodological as yours. Most of my expertise comes from asking very simple questions. So I thought I'd begin with a mini celebration, because I told you I was an optimist, and it's been 10 years since this conference was going. And this is a picture of Fiona Godley, my former boss, former editor-in-chief of the BMJ. And I thought I'd include this because when she was making this speech, whatever she was doing here, I wasn't at that conference, so I don't know exactly what she was saying. But she's sitting on a panel there, and I think the other 2 editors, I mentioned to Rita, if she's still here, that I was going to, you are there. And JAMA Internal Medicine are also on this slide. So what I wanted to say was that journals were here at the beginning of this conference. So we're going to celebrate that. And Rita Redberg, who's the former editor-in-chief of JAMA Internal Medicine, is over there. And there was a piece that was written just before that conference launched. It was written by Ray Moynihan and some other people about preventing overdiagnosis. And it was interesting looking back at it, at how much you already knew at that time. And in that piece, which sort of set out a summary, you were talking about the importance of screening detected overdiagnosis, about how tests were getting more sensitive and that might not always be a good thing, about incidentalomas, widening disease definitions. You had a list of example conditions where you suspected overdiagnosis was going on, and some thoughts about what might be behind it and the factors driving this, which I thought was interesting. But it wasn't all starting only 10 years ago. I dug out these out of BMJ's archive. They're really, really old covers. And I went back. These are all from 2003. And I thought it was interesting. We've only got covers online from then, so these are the oldest ones I could find. But I thought it was interesting that I could very readily find at least 3 covers that all relate to the theme of overdiagnosis, which suggests that BMJ, plus or minus its readers, has been interested in this for a long time. And if you look up to this year, so these are all covers from 2023. There's some classics in there: screening for prostate cancer, cardiovascular disease risk assessment, and then some new examples. So the example that Margaret mentioned yesterday on transgender medicine and young people. And sometimes BMJ's done theme issues, so really focused in on the principles behind overdiagnosis, brought together lots of examples, and that can be quite useful too. And it's also led to some pretty pictures. Some of these I've seen over the course of this conference in other slides, so I'm glad that at least our cover images are brightening up people's PowerPoint slides. I wanted to briefly mention this series, which I think has been really important, and I want to thank all the people at this conference who've contributed towards it. I could have picked really any of them to do as a case, but really I think the main messages to take from this, and I'm not going to read out all the examples there, is that it's so obvious that this is such a pervasive problem across medicine. And also, if you happen to spot a condition that isn't on there, you can get in contact with me or Juan from EBM Journal and let us know, and we can try and work with you to get that example out there too. So there's the celebration over. It was your little moment in the sun. And we're going to think more now about journals. And what I was going to do was to remind you a bit of their purpose, or how I might think as a journal editor. Not just because I like to talk about what I do, but because I think that helps people to understand what the challenges and what the opportunities are. I'm going to make some brief comments on the case, our case study of Alzheimer's that Stephen mentioned, and share with you a few ideas. So here we go. What is a journal? You're mostly researchers, and I know you love a definition. So I think a journal is a place that puts out academic and expert content which deals with a particular subject or professional or expert activity of some kind, and it basically records what's going on in that area. And as an editor, I think you're quite often balancing these two things. One is being a mirror of your community of authors and the content which is sent to you, so you're kind of showing what things are like at that time. And the other thing you can do as an editor is to shine a spotlight, and you can shine it where you want it to go. So you can select things, you can search things out, you can commission things, and you can shape things and shine light and give attention to things that you believe are important. And as a journal, you can do that. You can use your platform, you can nudge your community along with you. You can show them things that they might not have seen before. So these are a few other aspects of journals which I think can help us. Beginning in the centre there, so BMJ has a mission. It's a fairly straightforward one, to work towards a healthier world for all. And I think that's an opportunity there, because that's BMJ's mission, but I bet there's a lot of other medical journals out there that would have a mission that sounds a little bit like that. It might be limited to their clinical area, but I do think there's an opportunity that the overdiagnosis community can say to journal editors, if you believe in improving health, then surely you have to be interested in overdiagnosis, because it is an important part of improving health in your area. And perhaps that can help you find journals whose mission allows you to persuade them that overdiagnosis should be in their journal and featuring more strongly, and that interest is more important than some of the factors which can hold publications back, things like conflicts of interest, the resources needed to produce and edit and take through content on overdiagnosis, which can sometimes be much more labour intensive, costly, require legal resources at times than other types of content, and also sometimes just give editors the nudge to take on something that's important and address that fear that they may have. The other thing that I think about journals is that they are an important stamp, and so although it can be very painful, I understand, as researchers working with editors, I do think, and perhaps I'm biased in this regard, that it is worth it in some cases. And I do think that journals do serve as some kind of mark or stamp that your research or your idea or your thought has reached some kind of arguable threshold of importance, relevance and quality. And there's an opportunity, I think, therefore, to build trust in content which has come from journals as opposed to information which has come from elsewhere. And once your thoughts are out there in a journal, they're on the record, and there's a little stamp there, and they're archived away in a predictable way that people can find in the future and know what people were thinking at the time. Journals are also quite a mixed bag. an ever-growing bag filled with all kinds of quality of stuff. Journals are diverse in terms of their ownership and their geography and their intended audiences and their mission. They've got lots of different types of content. Some of them have research, some of them have non-research content. And so I think there's so much opportunity in terms of the places where you can publish and the types of things that you can say, the types of content that you can produce. To my knowledge, there isn't a journal of overdiagnosis. Maybe one of you is going to correct me on that. But I think that is a challenge in some ways, but it's also an opportunity to think that overdiagnosis has to matter in all these places, and it forces the content to make perhaps an uphill battle into all of these other journals. And maybe we can track that. And I think Emma talked a bit about, and Stephen has talked a bit about the MESH term on overdiagnosis. And I think it will be really interesting to see, as that content can be tracked, the breadth of the journals which are taking up some of this content. The other thing that I think journals are a bit of a bubble and also a spring. So journals aren't really the real world. They're kind of a place where you can test out some ideas in some senses. And they're a spring in the sense that journals can take content into other worlds. And we're going to talk about some of those other worlds later in this session. And that can be quite challenging in terms of communication, because the way that it needs to be presented and the style need to differ. And you suddenly need to fit in with these other things, which I think that Rafi and Deb will tell you more about, things like the news agenda, politics, healthcare systems, conflicts of interest, and the kind of mess of the world that lies beyond the journal. And that presents some challenges, but also some opportunities when the moment comes for your topic to come into the sun for whatever serendipitous reason it might be. I wanted to share a little bit about what I think has been quite a winning formula of this overdiagnosis series. Not all articles on overdiagnosis will contain all of these elements within them, but I think that there are elements in whatever comes up that help, if you can frame things in these terms, help to provide a formula that allows the content to move forward. So one thing that I think this this template was good at is beginning at the top with what really matters. So you have to be able to convince people why this issue matters. You also have to tell them what's changed or what's happened that is making overdiagnosis possible. You have to tell people why it is that we might think over doing more of this test or making more of this diagnosis is going to help us. What is this leap of faith that is happening? And then going on to talk about, is this right? Like, what is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What's the overdiagnosis? What's the underdiagnosis? What's the evidence of harm? And very importantly, what are the key uncertainties? So a lot of content that I've read over the years on overdiagnosis will get criticised for being perhaps a polemic or very one-sided. And I think if you follow this approach to showcase both the benefit and the harm, the overdiagnosis and the underdiagnosis, and to be frank about the uncertainties that exist, it makes it much easier to publish that content. And finally, I think it is being forward-facing and having some thoughts about how things could be better in the future. So here's our case. This is the case, the new drug. I'm not going to attempt to say it because it looks bad to me. But essentially the question that the research paper aimed to answer was, among people with mild cognitive impairment, note that that was also in the overdiagnosis series, mild dementia, what are the benefits and harms of a new drug for Alzheimer's over the course of about 18 months? And I wanted to talk about this from a journal's perspective, because when this comes into a journal, it's just coming in as a piece of research, and we're a place that publishes science, and so we have to judge that piece of science on its merit. So it's quite difficult to begin with the question of overdiagnosis. The way that this paper was actually published in JAMA, and I don't know what their internal thoughts and processes are. So this is my description of how I have been trained over the years to look at papers, and it begins with that question and looking at things like, is the question original? Is it relevant? Is it interesting? And is it true? And when you look at this, you'll know that this paper is going to score quite highly on a lot of those things. This is a large trial, relatively large trial of a drug. It's the first trial of that sort of size. It's relevant to the readership of the journal. It's a really important condition. The condition's got no cure, and it's very horrible. And at least as you read through it, there are many things about the study which are strong. There are many things about its reporting which are good and are going to speed this paper and make it likely to be published. So what can you as a journal do when you're faced with having a new piece of science and then you're thinking, well, when it leaves us, it has the potential both to do benefit and harm. And often what we do at journals is commission other content that goes around it. And when you look at this paper published in JAMA, they did have some additional editorials that went round that paper and discussed different aspects of it. And I think the other thing we have to recognise is this is just one trial. It's not a recommendation for use of the drug. So this is a little extract from Stephen's longer version of his slides, which he didn't put up. He gave you the summary, which I think was good. But I wanted to put this up because I think it demonstrates how difficult it is to extract this type of information out of a research paper. And that's probably not surprising if you think of where research papers came from, that they were really set up in an era of, in terms of their structure and format, that was based on print and large chunks of text. And I do think there is an opportunity for the overdiagnosis community, with others like those interested in evidence-based medicine, to think about what should a research paper look like in the future, and could we use different techniques and digitalization to produce something which is a bit more helpful to people. And it is very hard to go through papers and find this kind of information. So my final thoughts before I reveal my emojis for improving communication on overdiagnosis in journals is, I think that a big problem is that overdiagnosis content doesn't feel real to people when they read it. It can be quite hard to put faces and anecdotes to match the evidence that you're talking about. And I think that's one of the reasons why GPs and generalists find it easier, perhaps, to recognise those faces and cases, perhaps, than specialists do, because of the breadth of the things that they see. Other ways that overdiagnosis content can be made more real is making that connection between topical issues or broader health contexts that are going on. I think in this conference, it was a real strength to have that first session that we had on Monday, where we talked about sustainability and the link to overdiagnosis. And I think that's something that the community could do more of. The second thing is to be clearer about the information. I think we need to develop clearer language that quickly shortcuts people to understand what we really mean by overdiagnosis, and to think through who we really want to target with that information. Be clear about that. Is it useful to convey that type of information at an individual level? Does it help a doctor in a conversation or a patient? Or are these concepts slightly more abstract and better for conversations with policymakers or people thinking about populations? I think the other important thing is to make that information clear in the sense that it is trustworthy, clear that it's trustworthy and useful, and written in a measured tone. It's very easy, I think, for people in the overdiagnosis community, where they can see something going wrong and people being harmed, to become quite upset by that and write in quite emotive language, which I think can also be a barrier to people engaging with the content in the way that might be most effective. And the final thing is that I think we need to look outwards and draw more people in. And by that, I mean that I think we need to spread our tentacles into other communities and other groups of people. Some speakers we've had at this conference from different disciplines, but I think that web needs to grow to involve other related issues like sustainability, patient partnership, better evidence, transparency, conflicts of interest, determinants of health. All of these things relate to overdiagnosis. And finally, I think when we think about how the information moves out, is to think that we need those sort of tentacles to present information that can travel across and through into other channels, other forms of media, and onto social media. And just as we engage with methodologists to write good methods, I think we need to engage with people to write good communications. So there are your 3 emojis. To be real, to be clear, and to reach out your tentacles to help patients and the public.